Mencari kuyai kita likurkani Panchantam falta kuni.
God morgen and happy Wootens Day to you. I hope this week is going wonderfully and that all of those things that you are hoping and wishing for are coming true. Today, I want to talk about Odin, or as he was later known, Odin. So, before we get started today, I want to say thank you to all of you who have liked, followed, and subscribed us on all the multitude of platforms. I can only begin to express my appreciation for those of you who have done so. Thank you so much. For those of you who haven't, please like, follow, subscribe us on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, all the above, or all the audio platforms that are available out there for your podcasts. You can also visit us on streamlabs.com, where we provide our streaming every morning. That can also be reached at akoutlaw.live. So, as always, my wonderful family and friends at New Reality TV, newrealitytv.com, a streaming channel packed with a plethora of different perspectives that can offer us hopefully some insight into our own spirituality, helping us to obtain or maintain our mental space. It's a wonderful collection of individuals who want to guide and help and be there to provide that piece of intellect. Hopefully will help you. For those of you who haven't had a chance, have some change jingling in your pockets, want to drop it into our tip jar, by all means, please visit us at akoutlaw.live, and there you can make small donations, tips to help us promote the show even further, help us to get the algorithm out there, and of course get this message out to all of those who may need it. So check that out. For those of you who want to learn more about me and my message, my shows, and all of the things that I bring, including an opportunity to bend another ear and have someone who can listen and hopefully help you to find those pieces of intellect you need throughout the cosmos to bring you order within the mind, help you obtain or maintain that mental space, visit our website, norsewhispers.com/coaching. All right, so for those want to join us, Facebook Live is where we've got the chat open. You can always hit us up. I believe we also have TikTok as well, where you can put in whatever comes to mind, and we will work it into our discussion this morning, because this morning we're talking about Odin. Now, when Woden's Day was first named, this is when Odin was being recognized by the Germanic tribes. So back before really we see this explosion of a community or a society called the Norse. The Norse actually began their existence a little further south, as many believe that the Celts migrated north from their home on the Iberian Peninsula, kind of across Europe, and then kind of up in central through what was then Germania, on their way north. Now, we know, my family, we know that we actually originated from a tribe called the Danes. The Danes were a Germanic tribe, central Germania, that were backed up into the corner of the northeast corner of Germania then by the Roman Empire. These peoples resisted the Romans, fought back against the Romans, but ultimately would then migrate north across what is the Elbe River into the Jutland of Denmark. The word Denmark, meaning the march of the Danes, meant that my peoples migrated north through the Jutland to the, well, in my case, my family's history directly ties us to a town called Bierby. Bierby is about 6 kilometers short of the northernmost point of the Jutland. It's also 6 kilometers roughly in from the west coast of the Jutland, so up in that upper corner there of what is today Denmark. The Danes started really their recognition of a multitude of entities that they recognized from the spiritual energy around them at the time. And this tribe, certainly my family, would have recognized Wotan as being the kind of the god, the supreme god. And we see a translation or a transition from a very warriorous king or chieftain when he's with the being recognized by the Germanic people. He was a very this is where the stories of Wotan, Vili, and Vi, who were brothers of the giant boar. Wotan, Vili, and Vi were the sons of Boar, Boar being the giant. Boar, a very warriorous representation, represented quite a bit of war as he established order within the realms, within the 9 realms. But Wotan and Vili and Vi would go on to conquer the giant Ymir and form parts of the realm. Primarily, we see them use the pieces of the Ymir to form Midgard, and of course the protection around it. These are experiences that Wotan would have had. Wotan would have had many, many experiences as he laid the framework and the outline there for the realms, for all 9 realms, and most importantly Midgard. We find him collecting this mass grouping of experiences throughout his life. Now, as the recognition of Wotan kind of transitions to the recognition of what would be Othin, of course, being the chieftain of the Assyrian or the Asgardians, but the Assyr tribe. This meant that he kind of transitioned from a very warriors or an experience-driven individual to more of a review and experience, right? So Othin was more interested in wisdom. Now, what is wisdom? We've talked about this quite a bit, and we'll continue to say wisdom is really the collection of knowledge matched up to the collection of an experience. So it's a relatable knowledge. So it begins to build tracks in our mind, interrelating a multitude of knowledge together via the stream of this experience. So as the more we experience, the more wise we get. Othin recognized this. Now, we hear about Othin being the traveler. He's known for many different things, many different ways. He travels around the world with his ravens, of course, Mugin and Ugnin, and they are collecting data for him, more experiences, more wisdom. He's been building and building and building on this experience. Now, in our lives, this is the same thing. We read a book as an example, and I'm always impressed. One of my sons is very automotive orientated. He knows everything there is to know, or quite a bit anyway, about cars and how to maintain them and how to fix them and how to repair them. And he first, back when he was a younger lad, he would sit down with auto manuals and of course watch videos and the like, but he would read the book. So he's gaining knowledge from the book, right? So he's gaining that those intellectual pieces that are building his knowledge stack about a particular thing. But then it's a whole new world when he sits down or stands up or whatever he does to fix, actually hands-on fix a vehicle, right? So it's the wrench turns and the screwdriver uses and all the tools that it's going to take to actually do the task that's identified in this book, right? So knowledge, the book, teaches us the fundamentals. It teaches us some of the cornerstones about whatever it is. But then when we experience it, we find a whole new level of understanding, because now in this case, not only do we need the intelligence about taking the generator or the alternator out of the car, but we need the related experience of working the tools, right? Of using the socket and the wrenches and whatever other tools we may need. So now we're beginning to interrelate different knowledge stacks, because working the socket set is a skill in of itself, right? And it doesn't have to be used in automotive only. It can be you may put a deck together and be using these big lag bolts, monster thing, and you need the ratchet and socket to mount that lag bolt. It has nothing to do with automotive yet, so it's a standalone knowledge by itself. But once we interrelate it to now auto mechanics or auto repair or whatever, we're beginning to interrelate these parts. So this is a very simplistic example of how interrelating parts, the experience of doing the thing, is what now begins to connect these two things together. All right. So that's really the that's a very broad example, but this is experience, and this is how experience builds wisdom. So experience, knowledge come together to form wisdom. Same thing with your life, same thing with your emotions, right? So we read about romance novels are pretty abundant, and we read about these stories about how Romeo and Juliet there in the book do whatever they do to fall in love and live happily ever after. We're learning the knowledge from that book. Now, in this case, not only are we learning knowledge of what love is or what love means, but we're also gaining a second-hand experience, right? So they're telling a story about how Romeo wooed Juliet, and Juliet fell in love with him, and they do whatever the excitement of the book is, and then whether they live happily ever after or however the book ends. We're not only gaining this knowledge about what love is and what love feels like and what the emotion of love is, we're also gaining a second-hand experience. Now, this is the same thing we saw when Wotan would have gone to the Norse sisters at the base of Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil, of course, being in Norse legend the center tree of life that all the 9 realms exist within. At the bottom of Yggdrasil existed 3 major roots, and these roots went out, and each of them deposited into a particular well. Now, the well that Wotan would have visited would be the well of Urd. Urd being the eldest of the Norse sisters. Now, the Norse sisters, story all their own. For those of you who are not versed in Norse legends, the Norse sisters, very akin in the writing, very closely modeled after the Greek fates, right? So we have the past, present, the future, and each of these women would have had roles that they did, right? So in much the same way, in Norse legend, Erd, being the eldest of the three Norse sisters, would have met with spiritual entities before they bonded with a physical form, would have given them a lifespan of a physical existence. And they just said, hey, you're going to live for 99 years and then you'll depart this physical form. And the spiritual entity would have agreed to that and said, okay, I'm just looking for these kind of experiences, or I want this, whatever. Okay, we agreed, kind of signed the paper, metaphorically speaking, and they're bonded, they go through a physical lifetime, and then they depart. Now, when you depart this physical form, in Norse legend, they would have gone before Skald. Skald being the middle sister, or the present. She would have evaluated your life. Now, many people think that she looked at your conquerings, what you accomplished, what you had materialistic before you left the earth, and that's not what she evaluated. She's going to evaluate your life based on a tapestry sewed by her sister, Verdandi. Verdandi being the baby of the Norner sisters, the youngest. Sorry for any negativity there. But she was the youngest, and she sewed a tapestry based on your emotional responses to the events in your life. So, in other words, if you had a very major event in your life, a very conquering, you maybe won the Olympics or something, right? Well, Verdandi wouldn't have sewn that you won the Olympics. She would have sewn this idea that you embraced humility, you embraced, other support, you were supporting other athletes. That's what she's going to sew. So she's going to sew a representation of your emotional responses to the events in our lives, right? And so how well we handle that. Now, according to Norse legend, this sewing would have pretty much demonstrated your adherence, or your life's experience, your adherence to the 9 noble virtues of the Norse. Things like truthfulness, honor, courage, hospitality, industrialness, self-reliance. All of these things would have been sewn into the tapestry, and then based on the collection therein that Verdandi had sewn, Skald would then assign you one of the great halls to reside in until Ragnarok. Now, Ragnarok, of course, a whole new story and a whole new show. Ragnarok represented what Christianity would later go on to frame as Armageddon, the end of days. But in Ragnarok, it's a rebirth. Ragnarok is simply the destruction of many gods and goddesses will be lost in the great war that will be Ragnarok. And then there's a rebirth. So in much the same way that we read in Armageddon, many, many years later, Armageddon simply lots of loss, lots of war, lots of disease, famine, all kinds of battles that we have to fight until good triumphs over evil, and we see the restoration of life and peace supreme for X amount of years. Now, in the case of Christianity would go on to teach that 1,000 years of peace under Jesus, right? So after Armageddon, you have this peace. Experiences that we have in our lives are an integral part of our spiritual and physical growth. Don't know if you remember quite right off the top of your head, but when you were an infant and you were transitioning into the phase for parents worldwide, we probably recognize it as, oh boy, was when we transitioned into toddlerism, into being a toddler. Why? We got wheels, right? We were able to move. So whether we started crawling and then ultimately walking, running, and so on and so forth, we were building things up. And what we're doing during that phase is the brain is learning all the muscles necessary, all the movements, the balance, everything necessary to motivate. So we're gaining the knowledge. Okay, I need to move my arm in such a way that I can pull my body forward, right? So I'm crawling across the floor. But then I experience it. And what happens? I realize that my scenery is changing. Is I can go and see this other thing. I can go see this other thing closer, right? So there's a ball over there or a toy. I can now go get the toy and examine it more closely. This is the experience necessary to now elevate these thoughts, these knowledge stacks. Now I can interrelate them because I can move my arm without crawling, right? I could, if a truck driver goes by, for those of you who grew up in the era where you kind of do that number, and the truck drivers would typically honk their air horns. So I can do this without moving, right? Or I can put this in front of me and start crawling across the floor. So we're interrelating all of these skills together. Now, when it comes to emotions are no different. We are told this is what, when we're infant and our mother watches something traumatic on the television, and she turns to us and looks and says, this is what it feels like. This is pain, right? So we're watching the event, we're watching our mother's reaction, and we're being told. Told is the knowledge, right? And then the experiences of watching the event, watching our mother, and gaining that experience now begins to interrelate emotions together. Because again, you can have emotion without connecting it to something. So it's an individual thing. Or when we have an experience, we're now interrelating within our mind. It's a super exciting understanding of this thing called wisdom. Super important in our lives because this is how we interrelate knowledge with life, right? So we're living this knowledge that we've gained somehow, right? We know this is what it does and this is how it works. And so equally important in establishing our growth forward. As you remember, when we think about experiencing something and we're gaining a visualization, maybe a touch, maybe a hearing, audio, taste, or smell, whatever, that's all processing through our normal physical sensory input into our emotional filters. Our emotional filters are then going to apply the experiential knowledge or wisdom to then set our mood and, more importantly, process that emotional energy through the mind to establish either a peace or not. So all super important in our understanding of how we think and why we think the way we do. Remember, it's all about obtaining or maintaining our mental space. So wisdom and the experience and the knowledge, so that whole thing called wisdom, that whole thing is absolutely required for us to understand how we think. More importantly, how these emotions and this emotional energy within is going to affect how we think, right? Because it's going to have a very critical role in the interpretation of the experiences that we have. All part and parcel of what we do every minute of every day. So, as the legends speak of, Othin's seeking of experiences, or he actually sought wisdom, but the way he would get wisdom is by seeking out the experiences necessary. Now, in my tale before, as we spoke about Othin and drinking from the well of Erd, one of the things we have to remember is, according to the Norse legends, when you break them down, part of that was that we fed our experiences as individuals back into the tree called Yggdrasil. Now, Yggdrasil, of course, would take that experience represented in spiritual energy. It would pass it back through its branches, all the way back through the trunk. And this experience would be reflected in the water of the well, or in this case, the well of Erd. When Othin, according to legend, when he would then sacrifice one of his eyes, one of his physical eyes, that he would drink from the well, he was drinking experiences. So he was pulling in all these experiences from the well of Erd, and then his brain, then having all this knowledge, would then take all of these experiences and create the interrelationships between these knowledge stacks. This is what then gave him wisdom. This is also why the legends go on to say that it took 9 days and 9 nights that he would sleep to process all of these experiences with the knowledge he had. So, 2 points that I take away from that legend. Firstly and foremost, is experiences is what drives our growth as an individual. Secondly, sleep is absolutely required that we may be able to kind of interrelate those skills. Now, could we use meditation instead? Absolutely. But we're stilling the mind, we're getting some gestation going on, and we're having this interrelational tables now built within the mind. You too can do this with everything you experience. Remember, you're in charge. You're the authority. No one else is up here. You get to run the place. So take time, do some deep thinking. Make sure that we're thinking about each of our experiences and how it relates to us, and we too can grow in ways that we've never imagined possible. So today, Wotan's Day, take time to think about the experiences that you've had, think about the experiences that you're having, and prepare yourself for the experiences that you are yet to have. Remember, they are all part of this life's growth of learning, right? So have a wonderful Wotan's Day. We will see you again tonight, 6:30 Alaska time, for Sporksmall, where we're going to answer one of your questions. And remember, if you submit a question and I make a show about it, we're going to send you a free t-shirt. So submit those questions, and when we answer them in Sporksmall, we'll get you a free shirt in the mail, courtesy all me. So we'll make sure you get one. All right. In the meantime, my friends, check out newrealitytv.com, and as always, my channels on YouTube, TikTok, and or Facebook for more information about me and my shows. All right. Have a wonderful Wotan's Day, and we will see you again this evening.